be the person most ready to take the role when it opens up. It's not going to do you any favors coming to every one-on-one saying, how many more weeks do I have to be a BDR? It's like a kid in the back of the car saying, are we there yet? It's like the GPS is on screen. You can see it's 60 miles away. It's telling you the time right there on the bottom. Just pay attention to your surroundings and you'll understand the answer for yourself.
Welcome to Revenue Insights. We're joined by revenue leaders from some of the highest growth companies. Together, we explore how they built their revenue teams, the journeys they've been on, and the lessons they've learned along the way. Revenue Insights is brought to you by Ebsta. We're an AI-first revenue intelligence platform designed to help you close more deals, retain more customers, and forecast better. Enjoy the podcast.
Hello, everyone. On today's episode of the Revenue Insights podcast, I'm thrilled to have Dan Drees, the Global Vice President of Sales at Endpoint Protector, part of Netbricks. With over 20 years of experience in building and scaling sales teams within the InfoSec and identity space, Dan has a proven track record of driving growth and navigating complex industry shifts. From his leadership at Jumio to his current role at Endpoint Protector, Dan has been at the forefront of cutting-edge technology solutions for cybersecurity and identity management. His insights into sales leadership, navigating mergers and acquisitions, and creating high-performing teams will provide valuable lessons for leaders in any industry. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Guy.
So let's get started straight away. Dan, you've had a dynamic career spanning different leadership roles across sales and operations in cybersecurity and identity space. Can you share a bit about how your journey began and what sparked your interest in sales?
Yeah, sure. We can go all the way back. In college, for the first 2 years, was studying philosophy, which is incredibly interesting, incredibly fun, but not entirely profitable. After diving really deep into these sort of ancient and archaic thought processes, it was really my parents who asked me, how the hell are you going to support yourselves by knowing the most about all of these ancient philosophies? And I really didn't have a good answer. I pivoted. I think pivoting is usually wise when you find yourself without an answer. And I ported all of my philosophy credits into a minor. And then I spent the second 2 years of college focusing on getting a business administration degree. So it kind of became real halfway through college that college wasn't going to be forever and that I was going to need to somehow support myself. And if I ever wanted to have a family or attract a mate, I would probably need to have some sort of a bank account. So it was money driven, but it wasn't like I was born greedy. I just wanted to figure out a way to make it all work, and business seemed like the best avenue. My parents specifically advised me not to try to be a doctor or a lawyer because both of those professions require professional licenses. And I guess based on my behavior and attitude, they thought that I might be the kind of person to get that license or professional certificate revoked if I ever lost my temper or went off the wall with people. I probably wouldn't have enjoyed cutting people open and pulling out the body parts anyways. But yeah, they specifically warned me not to get a job that I could lose a license or certification in. So a little bit of background about where it all started and how we ended up in sales. And not to brag or try and flex on doctors and lawyers, but they spend a lot of time in school. And unless they themselves own a business, they're not going to outperform the W-2 of a high performing vice president of sales or a CRO in most situations. So if these people go in it for the money, to be a doctor or a lawyer, they're kind of misguided by a lot of outdated or antiquated thinking and career life planning.
Makes sense. Well, I appreciate the brutal honesty there, and it sounds like your parents knew you better than you did, so they were able to kind of give you that sound advice.
Yeah, and there was an impasse. Right when you graduate college, you're like, okay, now you're thrown out into the real world. What am I actually going to do? The year I graduated college was 2008. If anyone's old enough to remember 2008, who's listening to this, not a great time to jump into the working world. It was a huge financial crisis. Banks were on fire. Stock market was destroyed. So I spent my first year out of college working for actually a really great company called Enterprise Rent-A-Car. So if you're in the US, it's a car rental place. You wear a suit and a tie and you try to sell people insurance products for a rental car. So it is sales. You're trying to sell this optional insurance and also pre-sell gasoline and roadside assistance and things that people don't really need. But that's where really all the margin is on the rental car project. So That's what I was selling. I was in Texas at an airport, so 110-degree weather, wearing a suit, washing cars. It was really less than motivating, but in a certain way, it did inspire me to go try to find a job with an office. So we've gone from reading books that don't make you any money to getting a business degree to washing cars in a suit in 110-degree weather. Again, time to pivot. But they, as in Enterprise Rent a Car, did have a really great management training program. So every employee was a management trainee, which looked really good on a resume, because anybody who I was trying to get employment with in the future saw that I had some sort of formal training. It is a little bit of a bait and switch because I'm not sure how much you learn about management from washing cars, but the the title here is important, which is we can circle back to that later in the conversation. After washing cars, I was literally trying to decide between what a profitable sales career would be. You want to sell something that's expensive. If you're selling French fries for $2, there's not a lot of profit margin in there that the salesperson's going to earn as commission. So I was kind of looking at two different paths. I was looking at technology or medical technology. And then we kind of got back to the same impasse like, do I want to try and hit my quota based off shoving somebody's body full of pacemakers and heart valves? Or do I want to try and sell computers, servers, networking equipment? Both of those are in high demand, but from the outside looking in, it felt like I'd be able to sleep better at night if I hit my quota off of selling somebody a couple extra computers that they may or may not need versus getting a doctor to put physical devices into people's bodies so I could hit a quota. So I kind of shied away from medical and leaned into
All right.
technology.
So I really love the kind of decision making that you're going through to kind of get to where you got to. So what was your first job in tech?
I worked for a reseller, a VAR, a value added reseller called SHI. SHI, great reseller. They have thousands, hundreds of thousands of customers, probably globally, roughly 5,000 employees, do billions in dollars worth of revenue. But the great thing in my situation was they hired about 30 people every month. They knew at the time that not all those 30 people were going to make it past the first year, but nobody in the class really understood that. They need to keep people on the phones, calling people and offering services. And if people aren't familiar, a value added reseller sells literally everything. You can sell someone keyboards, mice, headsets, laptops, antivirus software, DLP software, anything software related, Microsoft agreements, data center equipment, so server storage, networking. So it was really lucky, I guess you could say, that I landed there first because I got a introduction to all these different types of information security and information technology products. A lot of folks who start selling a specific software solution, yeah, they might become a DLP expert or a web application security expert, but they fail to ever realize how that integrates with things like Active Directory or the differences between hosting something in AWS and hosting it on premise and the costs associated there. So it was almost like 4 years in college, again, learning how these information security professionals think, behave, the nuances between a network guy and a server guy, a security guy, and a help desk admin. So it was great exposure to literally everything that at this point is like the technological plumbing of how companies run. And career path, we can talk a little bit about where you focus, where you go a little broad. It was good to start broad, in my opinion. But because of the huge catalog of products I could offer, most good salespeople start to realize that you're going to make more money selling data center equipment than mice and keyboards. It's more fun. You get to talk to higher level decision makers, and the commission checks are going to be a lot larger. There was a trend when I was at a reseller, SHI, that the private company data center was becoming less and less of a thing. So in the past, many of you probably know this, large businesses had their own data center, racks of servers, huge networking equipment, large offices. But if you actually looked at trends of the business, I think a lot of people like zone out during their company's QBRs or like sales kickoffs. If you see data center sales falling, maybe the industry's buying fewer data centers. I don't think we got worse at selling data centers at SHI over that time, but AWS was emerging and people were switching to SaaS hosted products, SaaS hosted solutions, SaaS hosted workloads. So that was sort of writing on the wall that as AWS, as stock was going up and data center sales were going down, maybe I didn't want to specialize in that area of the business. Another core area of SHI's business is Microsoft products. I really didn't want to sell a product that literally nobody likes. Like nobody likes Word. Nobody likes, I mean, there are some nerds out there who love Excel and like there's an Excel cult going on, but nobody really likes Teams. Nobody likes SharePoint. Google does that way better. So data centers kind of off the table. Microsoft, probably hard to get a job at as a young professional, but also nobody likes their products. They would take your phone call, but I can't imagine people enjoy discussing their Microsoft agreement with you. And that left commodity hardware, which is mice, keyboards, headsets. No, I didn't want to work at Radio Shack. So the only real logical answer to me was to get into security software. And that market was changing too. Around that time, the big players were switching all of their customer base from perpetual licenses, which literally last forever. You buy the license and you own it, to subscription licenses that needed to be renewed annually, year over year. So I saw that as sort of the place to shoot to get high margin sales that lead to large commission checks, and towards an industry or a part of the industry that was going to be stable for the next 10 to 15 years. It's easy to accuse me of saying all of this in hindsight, but I literally sat and stared at my desk for hours thinking which of these different product categories are going to be a winner in 10 years and where do I want to focus? Why I did that, I don't really know, but I think I was just hating life, making hundreds of phone calls a day and trying to think about how to get a better life with a better job and a better career and more stability. So it's not hindsight. It was actually in the moment trying to see these things
Well, I
happening.
think the takeaways for our listeners here are, first of all, that clarity of thought, right? Knowing where your strengths and weaknesses are and what goals you have allowed you to pivot on a number of occasions. And then when you decided you wanted to be in sales and B2B sales in particular, you didn't go to, go, right, okay, let's go to a startup or to, a 5-man business. You joined an organization, SHI, a big business with lots of infrastructure, lots of process and training, I'm assuming. So perhaps looking back at SHI, it gave you the grounding in what is sales and how to win, and an opportunity to learn from a group of people around you. I think one of the challenges that people coming into sales have at the moment is that so many of the roles these days are remote. Frankly, if I didn't have a decade sitting as part of a sales team, I don't think I would be where I am today. The lessons I learned from other people and the processes and structures that I was given, I think it's very difficult to impart that knowledge to people when they're working remotely. So I think the amazing to see the thinking process that you went through and that clarity of thought that you had about, right now, I want to gather this skill and this is a good place for me to go and get that. And you don't have to eat the elephant in one sitting, right? Step one is let's just get the basics right. And if I can find an environment that's going to train me up and give me the clarity, the information I need to be really good at that principles of selling, then the next phase of my career, once I've got that under my belt, is right, okay, now what am I going to sell that's going to give us the biggest numbers? And that took you into cybersecurity, is that right?
Yeah, it took me into specifically selling software as a subscription. I don't almost cussed. I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss, but I screwed that up too. At first, I thought that you were just supposed to, go find a SaaS company and everything was going to be great. The first SaaS solution that I sold was a public relations monitoring software that told you how many times your name was mentioned on the internet. Cision is probably the largest product in that category, but I went from selling serious products that serious businesses needed to run their business to trying to talk to public relations experts whose job is to literally bullshit. Like public relations is just spewing bullshit. So now my target persona was public relations people. And I was selling a software that was nice to have, but not necessarily didn't keep the business running. And I screwed up phenomenally doing that. I didn't really understand that I had this 4 years of experience understanding a buying persona, which was IT people, and I completely flipped just to go for this goal that I thought was so smart, selling a SaaS product. It wasn't all bad because when you work at a reseller, you're not really demoing products. You're kind of supporting the vendor through the sales process, working at an actual software publisher or a vendor. The account executive's job is much more demonstrating the product, working them through a proof of concept, and getting them to really prove their use cases and understand that this is something that's going to help their team. So it was a year well spent in the fact that I was running my own demos, working people through proof of concepts. But man, did I screw up. I switched industries and I didn't even know that was going to be a problem. So did a year because we can, give some advice here to young people. Yeah, if the company's on fire, don't stay there for a full year. But if it's not good, but okay, you don't want to be the guy that jumps every 3 months. That's gonna catch up to you. So I kind of bit the bullet and I didn't perform well at all because one, people didn't need this product, and two, I didn't know how to sell it to these people. So the perfect storm of zero success for that year. But I pivoted back I kind of realigned my goal because I got into a SaaS information technology product. So it took me a year and a little bit of a hiccup and watching my bank account dwindle over the course of a year to really realize that I was in the right direction. Like directionally, I was correct, but I made a fundamental error in accidentally switching
Look,
industries.
I think sometimes at the time it feels like the wrong thing, and a really big mistake. But actually, it probably gave you some resilience and allowed and gave you that focus of what knowing what's not good meant that if you're going to make a mistake in your career path, if you're doing it early, it's not the end of the world. What you don't want to be doing is finding yourself in the wrong role in your 40s and 50s, right? That's so perhaps we say that. That the cheapest mistake you can make is the first one. And so getting that out the way and allowing you to then pivot into something, knowing what you don't want almost helped you to work out what was next.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, early in the career, better time to make a mistake. But in my personal life, I had just had my first child and just got married at that same time where I was having this absolute failure of a year. So wife checks the bank account before we gets married. She's like, this guy's a winner. This is my winning bet. Let's have a baby. And then 7 months later, that entire bank account's drained and we don't know what we're doing. And the gamble that we were so confident in has gone horribly wrong. So yeah, I mean, there's always pressure, but get them out of the way early. Try to pick an industry and stick with it. Your specific industry knowledge compounds over time, just like any investment. And where I got this foundation in, all these different types of information security products, it's paid dividends as I've moved through my career. Like you said, Guy, like I was always sort of looking at the future and I wasn't thinking like, I want that now. I was thinking, how do I need to position the boat when the wind starts to blow? It's going to end up in the right direction. And just like you said, where do you want to be when you're 40 and 50? I did not want to be an account executive when I was 40 or 50. No disrespect to the people that don't want to take on leadership, but I just couldn't imagine someone else taking me to a one-on-one and asking me about my monthly performance or my quarterly performance when I was 50 years old and had grown children. That scared me and kind of made me explore and work really hard to get into a leadership role. Little did I know that even in leadership roles, you still have a boss and they still ask you about your monthly and quarterly performance and your activities. I thought all that would probably magically go away, but you always have a CRO, or if you're CRO, you always have a CRO or a CEO. CEO is responsible to the board. Board is responsible to the endowment. I mean, it never goes away, but I'm firmly against being a 50-year-old account executive.
We'll return to the episode in a moment. This podcast is brought to you by Ebsta. Every year, we produce the B2B Sales Benchmarks Report. It provides insights from the analysis of billions of revenue dollars, revealing what attributes drive top sales performance and highlighting where time and money are wasted. To get early access to this year's benchmarks report, sign up for our newsletter at ebsta.com/newsletter. Now, back to Revenue Insights.
No, I buy into that. I went through a similar journey. I was, I think, 29 years old and had consistently earned more money every year in sales. And I got to the point where I thought that, this paycheck's great, but it's probably slightly embarrassingly good. And while I'm pretty good at selling, is it really going to keep going, on this linear line up and to the right? And I think it scared the hell out of me that wasn't going to be sustainable. And I needed to kind of change what I was doing and really set up our own. For me, it was setting up my own business. But I agree. you really, if you are in sales, the upside is that you can get paid very well, but on the downside, you're only as good as your last month's deals. And you've only got to miss 3 or 4 months in a row, and all of a sudden you're on a pit, and you don't know what's coming next. So, and a lot of that may not be in your control, and trying to get more control over your destiny and the direction of travel, I think, is key. And yeah, becoming an expert in one particular market is absolutely key. And I think one of the mistakes a lot of younger people getting into sales makes is, it reminds me of a story of a friend of mine he used to play poker in the background, had a full-time job, but then played poker, and he really enjoyed playing poker. In fact, he made more money playing poker than he did in his job, and thought he'd stop working and play poker instead. And of course, before you know it, he's not enjoying poker anymore. So be cautious of recognize the fact that there's a reason they call it work. It does have to, there is graft that has to go on. There has to be, that you have to do to get into it. But building that knowledge and expertise, but also, especially in sales, again, it's in particular in B2B sales. With all of of AI and everything else out there, relationships still drive revenue. And the more you can build that network, the more you can become that trusted advisor to more and more people, then at least you're in the mix, and you've got that kind of competitive advantage over people that haven't had that history.
Step one, if you're sitting here like, how do I reverse engineer this into a better situation for myself? You're probably watching this because you work in sales or you want to work in sales. If you already work in, or Guy touched on this, if you don't work in sales, find a bigger company that you might not enjoy working at, but that's going to have some sort of enablement program that hires classes of new hires, that doesn't hire one-off new hires. Try to enter some sort of organization that gives you a community right off the bat and some sort of structure. If there's a new hire manager, it's their responsibility for you to be successful too. You're not all on your own. So go big and then gradually work smaller and smaller until you can get into the perfect situation for you. That's unsolicited advice. But also, if you do already have a sales role, I mean, step one is learn your own product. You have SEs, you have your entire product team, you have your marketing team, you have your free time. I mean, you're not going to be on a call every single minute of every day. And learning your product inside and out is really step one. Become a master of your own product. And then from there, start to learn all of your competitors' products. It is really not that hard. You can go on YouTube, you can watch the demos, you can figure out what parts of their products compare to your products. You can go to their website and ask their chatbot questions because they'll have no idea that you work at a competitor. You can create a fake email domain and inbound them and request a demo and have their SE waste their time teaching you all about their solution. If you go to trade shows like Black Hat or InfoSec or even small regional ones, go meet the other reps who work at your competitors, get them to tell you why they win and why you lose. You can do it transparently and honestly and say, hey, I work at a competitor. I'll trade you our info for your info. You can print out a fake badge that says that you're somebody blah, blah, blah from XYZ company and you're a decision maker, and you can go trick them into doing it. But once you learn your product and all of your competitive products, guess what? You know that industry from a vendor side. And hopefully you're talking to customers along the way, and you're not just asking them what their budget, authority, and timeline are. Hopefully you're asking them about how this product actually solves problems and why it's valuable to them. So I think people get caught up in things like qualification methodology, and the conversation gets so mundane and so boring because you're just trying to fill out your fields in Salesforce when you've never really learned why your product's being purchased and implemented anyways.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. I think the overarching principle here is stay curious, and we see it. That you can tell very quickly the salespeople that are going to be successful because they are curious. They're the ones who, they'll reach out to the product team and go, "Look, any chance I can, buy you a coffee at the end of the day, and will you sit with me for half an hour? I'm really keen to understand how this works or how that works." And versus others that don't want to be here or don't want to turn up and be that curious. And that curiosity goes all the way through. It's not just in the product side, but also the way that they talk to customers and prospects. It's that curiosity about, tell me about the challenges you've got. Tell me about the other projects you're working on, even if it's nothing related to this. Because, even if it's not competing for budget with what I'm selling you, it's certainly going to be competing with time. And maybe the other projects you're working on are a higher priority or going to give you a higher return on investment. And maybe we should talk about this again in 6 months' time. And actually, that level of curiosity coming across as that expert advisor puts you in a place where you're able to you can call on that relationship again because you added value. But yeah, I think being curious is one of the key data points for a successful salesperson, certainly to have longevity.
And there's unconventional ways that you can add value too. And I'm not saying this to brag, but the largest sale I ever did came from a small sale at company A. That director moved to company B that was much larger. I reached out to him, congratulated him, and said, "What's your first challenge here?" And he said, "Well, I have to hire an entire team." Okay, well, I'm a salesperson who sells to the type of people that you want to hire. I've sold hundreds of projects to the exact type of people this dude wants to hire. So I just started introducing him to all these other people who already use my product. And what do you know? Every single one of them was successful with the product at the time. So I stacked a former customer's team with former customers. And by the time this gentleman was ready to actually tool up this team, it was a pretty obvious quorum amongst all of those users, individuals, what product they would want to evaluate. So you can help people in ways that stack the deck in your favor too. And that's a 6 month project before we even get to the demonstration because I'm providing value outside of a sales cycle to an individual I already had trust with. But be creative too, guys. You're not going to be helpful just inside of your product or your solution. Like the amount of jobs that I've seen come up on LinkedIn that I have no interest in working, but I know two or three people who would help that person and would be good. It's all synergistic too. If I can make a new friend by helping them hire a good person who's already my friend, what do you know? My network is just growing exponentially. There's so many ways that you can just be creative and bring value. And there's a lot of good people on LinkedIn that do stuff like this. Like Scott Leese, I've never met him in person, but he's offered me two jobs and he just helps people. So US people probably really familiar with Scott Leese. There's people all over LinkedIn doing this. I don't necessarily do this publicly on LinkedIn just because I think it's weird for salespeople to talk about sales in the same marketplace where their customers exist. I don't want to be giving sales advice when the 6,000 connections that I have in IT can also read that. It's kind of like giving away the script to a play or, breaking down the fourth wall there. But you can do this all on DM, on private conversations.
Let's jump into the current role that you're in. You've been at the current business now for a couple of years, or coming up to a couple of years. Tell us a bit about Endpoint Protector and what they do, and then tell us a bit more about the role that you're in and where the business was when you joined, and what you've achieved in the couple of years you've been there.
I joined Endpoint Protector when it was a standalone business. I was brought in as the VP of sales for North America. And we talked a little bit about this in the beginning that we might talk about mergers and acquisitions a little bit here. But the writing was sort of on the wall that Endpoint Protector was going to be acquired on a certain time horizon. It's all a little bit murky. The higher you up you get in an organization, the more rumors you hear and the more of the conversation you're exposed to. But it was pretty obvious that the company was going to have new owners within the next year to 2 years. So I focused on the things that I could control. I was in charge of North America. No disrespect to teams working EMEA or APAC or other regions, but America should win. There's the most, total addressable market sitting in America for most software products. I just did my best to focus on making sure that my team was successful. And as the organization changed ownership, I was the top performer out of the sales leadership team. And I was retained to take on the global responsibility for the business. So in addition to North America, now I'm responsible for the Endpoint Protector product line inside of Netbricks. Roughly 20 employees, combination of account executives, BDRs, and the leadership layer in between that. But I just put myself in a position where it was an obvious choice which person to move forward with when in like most mergers and acquisitions, you're trying to reduce cost and increase performance. So I essentially agreed to do a job that 2 to 3 people were doing when it was a standalone company.
Oh, congratulations! And have you seen the nature of the job change through that acquisition? So when was the business acquired, and what's the journey been like since?
Acquired about 9 months ago. It's been great to be part of a larger product portfolio. Cross sells are, typically higher probability for a win than, a cold outbound or a new inbound. So it's been really great helping the existing Netbricks customers better understand and implement the Endpoint Protector product. So that's a phenomenal opportunity. I said in the beginning, start big, but through the mergers and acquisitions process, especially in, a sales leadership role, you're not typically being asked for your input on who buys the company. So now I'm back in a little bit larger company, which has its pros and cons too. So just navigating being a sort of business unit inside of a larger business has been a great learning experience too.
I was going to say, Dan, that the learning curve sounds phenomenal, and I think that's probably the one of the big takeaways for me from this conversation is always focus on trying to get a place where your learning curve is as steep as it possibly can be, because at a minimum you should always be either learning or earning, and ideally doing both. But and it sounds like you've got an amazing opportunity to learn a lot more from this through this exercise, and going through that transition process, I'm sure was a massive learning experience, and still a lot more to come.
Yeah, I've specifically focused on North America when I've been in leadership for most of my career. Yeah, people in New York City are slightly different than people in California, but when you take on the whole world, you realize the nuanced differences between Germans and Italians and people from Singapore and working a SARC market. So America, the North American market has the advantage too, where it's a pretty homogeneous buying persona for all of the United States. And again, yeah, people in New York are sometimes jerks, and people in California are sometimes lazy. But for the most part, it's the same culture. Um, and it's been eye opening and a great learning experience too, just to kind of deep dive into the other regions, see how like the reseller distributor models work in all these different regions. So an infinite amount of things to learn.
And so you've got a sales team of 20 that you're now responsible for. Tell us a bit about the tech stack that you're working with. What are you using? What do you like? What do you what don't, if there's anything you don't like, tell us that as well.
I'm not a fan of always jumping to the latest and greatest and hoping that it's going to move your metrics like 2 to 3%. I'm sure my BDR team would kill me when I say that I'm not super interested in getting more and newer, complicated tech stacks. I mean, and the more you're exposed to being responsible for the budget too, the less likely you are to jump from product to product and try all these crazy things. Like I get a pretty good response rate with a cell phone and LinkedIn DMs, and just doing it the old fashioned way. So as long as you can talk on video, have those calls recorded just so you can make sure that your team understands the product and is saying the right things and not doing anything unethical. Any video conferencing solution is just fine. I don't think outreach is the future, but it's still definitely the present. Just using basic automation tools to make sure that you're not retyping the same email 600 times. But I don't think it has to be that complicated.
Yeah, no, I agree. Again, relationships still drive revenue in our space. So building, there's no shortcut there. But I do think the tech has a role to play in freeing up the salespeople to spend more time building those relationships. And obviously, I'm an advocate because that's what we do. But I know I hear where you're coming from, and I think we can get distracted by too much tech a lot of the time. So, and Dan, if you think about the year ahead, where are you going to be? If you think about your planning and what the year ahead will bring, you've got an exciting opportunity in this new world with the acquisition that's just happened. But what are your goals for the year ahead?
The goals for the year ahead is to make sure that my business unit inside the wider business of Netbricks is extremely competitive. I don't want to make it sound like we're all fighting each other, but if there's a stack ranking, I want to be on top of it, and I want to make sure that my people are on top of it. So just to continue to advocate for the product that I've been working with for 2 years and making sure that it stays super relevant under the new ownership, and make sure that we can help our customers to the best of our abilities in our little niche.
And from a sales leadership perspective, I mean, now you're on the other side of the coin. You're now the one responsible for bringing these people up, and their career path is in your hands. So, what I assume you take that responsibility really seriously. And how do you go about bringing those salespeople in? And are there any particular stories you can tell us of some, maybe green resources you brought through that journey and are now performing?
Yeah, we actually have a pretty phenomenal track record of taking people from SDR to BDR to mid-market account executive to enterprise account executive. And I always just try to guide people to understand what the people in the next role above them are doing. For example, like I want to see a BDR that proactively learns how to demo before ever asking their boss about the account executive role. Sure, if they're curious, I just see this thing with BDRs that come in and they're like, okay, what's the track to be an AE? And I'm like, well, how good are you going to do? And what are you going to do to get there? Because there is no magic formula that at the 12-month mark, we're going to promote you just because you sat in a chair for 12 months. And if they need the help to understand that, like, hey, this is what an AE does, demonstrate that you're competent in doing that. And that's how you actually get there. At a certain point, an AE is going to leave or an AE is going to unfortunately be worked out of the system due to performance or dedication issues. So be the person most ready to take the role when it opens up. It's not going to do you any favors coming to every one-on-one saying, how many more weeks do I have to be a BDR? It's like a kid in the back of the car saying, are we there yet? It's like the GPS is on screen. You can see it 60 miles away. It's telling you the time right there on the bottom. Just pay attention to your surroundings and you'll understand the answer for yourself.
No, I hear you. I think that's great advice. And I had an SDR that started with us and then left after 6 months because they hadn't been promoted yet. And it was, guys, good luck. It was a few years ago when the market was booming and they were offered elsewhere. But again, it's not a sprint; it's a marathon. And as long as your learning curve is steep and you're going to continue on that path and keeping curious and moving forward, then stick with it. But listen, Dan, I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for all your input. I think everyone learned a lot from this experience. And don't be afraid to pivot. Focus on the goals and find, if you're just into sales, find a place you can learn and develop your skill set before you move forward. So and then pick a market that's got massive opportunity for growth. So listen, thank you so much for your takeaways. Really, really enjoyed the session today. If anyone wants to engage with you, Dan, directly or have a conversation, how can they reach out to you?
LinkedIn DMs. That's where all the magic happens.
Very good. All right. Well, I'm sure people will be reaching out. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. Looking forward to seeing how things evolve after the acquisition.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Guy. Thank you for having me on. Best of luck with the podcast, and maybe we can do it again someday when we're both just taking over the world.
There we go. Looking forward to it. Thanks again, Dan.
Thanks for listening to Revenue Insights from Ebsta. If you want to learn more from some of the brightest minds on how to predictably and efficiently grow revenue, then subscribe to our newsletter. We'll deliver actionable insights straight to your inbox. Go to ebsta.com/newsletter. See you soon.